Hi, I'm Caitlin Dubin, and this is the Rural Woman Podcast. I'm a first-generation farmer who married into agriculture. Born and raised in a city, I was so unfamiliar with where my food came from, but I was determined to figure it out. Through my journey into agriculture, I saw women who were strong but humble, often taking a back seat. To me, these women were leaders who deserved a seat at the table. I created the Rural Woman Podcast to share the voices of women in an industry whose stories often went untold. The rural entrepreneurs who live and breathe their work, full of grit and pride. We come here to share our stories, to be in community with each other, to be challenged and inspired, but most importantly, to be celebrated and to be heard. We may not all live, farm, ranch, or homestead the same, but we are all connected. We are rural women, and our stories are worthy of being told. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Rural Woman Podcast. Today you'll meet Patti Durand, a 27-year professional agrologist with a background in entrepreneurship and finance. Patti has guided hundreds of Canadian farm business families to competently navigate the paths of transition decision-making. As a dynamic speaker and workshop leader, Patti aims to provide relatable, actionable ideas to help business families move ahead together and with certainty. Her positivity, practical experience, and strategic brain means Patti can help move a lot of dirt quickly towards impactful results to achieve farm business goals. Patti has recently authored The Future Leader, the Successors Guide to Family Business Leadership. Friends, I am so excited for you to meet my friend Patti Durand today on the podcast. I recently had the opportunity to attend a conference with Patti, and it was an absolute delight to be able to spend so much time with her, and I am so excited to share her with you today. Before we get to Patti's interview, we have a listener review. Friends, I don't know the last time I got to read one of these on the air, but I'm so excited to do so. This listener review comes from Madeline Parantis. She left this over on the Rural Woman Podcast Facebook page. This podcast is a binge-worthy pastime. If you are needing some company during morning chores or something to pass the time during a grain run drive, these stories are for you. So many relatable and knowledgeable women get to share their daily lives with us all, and it's a joy to get to listen. I have learned so much about other types of agriculture outside my bubble of livestock, and for sure got misty a time or two listening to some heartfelt sentiments. I'm a true fan and will continue to make listening a part of my daily routine. Well, thank you so much, Madeline, for your kind review over on our Facebook page. And friends, if you haven't left a review on any of the platforms or a number of the platforms that there are to leave ratings and review out there, I would truly appreciate it. Apple, you can leave a rating and review. Spotify, you're able to rate with stars. And I believe there's comment sections on Spotify too. So if there is a aha moment or a misty moment for you, I would love to hear that. Your feedback helps shape the show, and we sure do appreciate it here. Without further ado, my friends, let's get to this week's episode with Patti. Patti, welcome to the Rural Woman Podcast. How are you today?
I am happy to be here.
I am also happy you are here, and I feel like I am sitting with a friend, and we are about to have just a great conversation about all things Patti and succession planning and your new book and all of the things. Before I fangirl too much over you, Patti, tell everyone listening who you are, where you're from, and what your connection to agriculture is.
Ooh, that's a big request. So Patti Durand is my name. I am from Humboldt, Saskatchewan, which has been home for 27 years. Originally from a hog and seed farm north of Winnipeg, a community called Toulon, Manitoba. The connection to agriculture, boy, it's a long list. So my husband and I both grew up in farms. We both have our degrees, and he has his master's in agriculture. We have been consulting with farmers, though we haven't actively farmed ourselves for our entire career. And for myself, I've had the privilege of working with hundreds of Canadian farm families. And I can't tell you specifically what's around the corner, but I am so optimistic about the possibilities.
Amazing. Well, you started on a farm. So tell us about the family farm growing up.
So, like I said, hog and seed operation, not a big farm. Like there was one quarter, I guess 2 quarters owned and one rented, but it was the value add of the seed business. Also had some cows and chickens. It was very mixed farm and big garden, all of those things. And like a 30 sow barn, which in the 80s was very suitable and appropriate. My dad had a genetic lung disease and so had chronic health issues that precipitated some pretty significant changes required. And unfortunately, he passed away in March of 92 when I was 16. And so my journey in agriculture is something that he didn't get to witness. And my gosh, I wish I could have shared it with him. But my time talking to my mom in particular, I've often said that she taught me how to do what I do for a living because they had a plan. And they had conversations about what the future looked like and what would happen if something happened to him. And we had the privilege of focusing on grieving and not whether we could pay for groceries or not. And so then going into my degree, what I already knew to be true about how much I loved about rural Canada just was reinforced. And it was the beginning of a great story.
So let's dive in more to that story and that career that you have built for yourself in agriculture. What have you been doing since you graduated university, Patti, just a few years ago?
Well, and, I definitely, and you and I have spoken about as entrepreneurs, the journey can be convoluted. And at sometimes in the world, there's the perception of, oh, well, you can't really keep a job, can you? Like, you're not very focused. But instead, what I've come to appreciate as I've matured, as I've grown, is that I'm a project kid. I tend to move into things, figure them out, master them, and move on. And that is a skill set. And so what it equipped my husband and I to do was build businesses that allowed us to be home with our 2 daughters who were born in the early 2000s. They're both at university now. And so I've told clients, I've told friends, I'm like, I can't tell you what our next business will be because I haven't seen it yet. I see horizon. I tend to look out and anticipate what's coming. And sometimes I'm more correct than others, but the path, I started working for a herbicide company straight out of university, great experience with cyanamide and then BASF. Then my maternity business, we bought a Mr. Sub franchise, which we ran for 9 years. My husband has an agronomic consulting company, Field Good Agronomics, which is in its 22nd, 23rd year. And once our girls were kind of an age that it made sense, I went back to corporate work and worked for Scotiabank. And little did I know that was filling out my knowledge from a financial perspective. I'd had marketing background. I'd been in the boots of an entrepreneur for a long time. We'd built things from scratch. We'd built relationships, systems, understanding all of those things. But understanding credit and finance was the final piece before I presented at a conference and was seen by the individual who was hiring at Farm Credit Canada for their agriculture transition specialist role, which was a pilot role in 2018. At first, in that particular situation, I was not clear that I was the right person for that role. But once I understood that effectively it was building a business from within, I realized, oh yeah, I'm the right person. And what an incredible experience.
I love how you framed this of essentially having such a well-rounded bit of knowledge when it comes to, building up the business and then the financial piece being really something that well-rounded it out. And how often is it that people with that entrepreneurial mindset of getting into new opportunities or being offered new opportunities and being like, well, I don't think I'm the right fit for that because I'm not a farmer or I'm not an XYZ, but knowing that essentially farm business is a business, and it's, you just get to drive a tractor and have fun running that business versus, whatever else happens like in a family business. Like, so having all of that knowledge and information and having that farming background. And like you said, growing up on the family farm and experiencing what you did with the loss of your dad and having those plans already, you've already lived through farm succession. So what a perfect fit and opportunity for you. And, I know Patti Durand through your time at FCC and the amazing presentations and the knowledge and information that you were able to share. And since moving on from FCC, still being able to do that and give farmers and farm families the knowledge and the tools to have these difficult conversations when it comes to succession planning. So tell us more about kind of what your current journey is in your entrepreneurial journey that you've been on.
Thanks. Yeah, it's good to reflect. I appreciate it. What I came to realize is that in my time working with farm families in succession discussions, and they were asking for help, but there was not necessarily a common bond other than they farmed in Canada. So there was large, there was small, there was wealthy, there was high debt, there was young, there was old, there was small families, big families, quite rural, pretty close to urban, all of these common things. But there was universal patterns emerging. And as I was absorbing this and digesting it and honestly studying psychology, like I was absorbing as much as I could. I'm like, why do people respond that way? Why do they hurt each other like that? Why aren't they having these conversations? What is going on? I developed a sense that as meaningful as it is to sit with one family, it feels hopeless when you consider the tens of thousands of Canadian farm families in Canada. And so how might we help more people faster? And so taking that knowledge and saying, okay, you know what? I see a greater need that I personally am really drawn to, and I'm going to go and do that. The most recent company, Bright Track Consulting, was born. Bright Track comes from the message that people tell me that I help to shine a light on the path. In the coaching and conversations and feedback and listening that I do with them, I open doors and I plant seeds. I'm not saying you have to do this. I'm not saying this is the way. I'm trying to help them open their mind to what possibilities exist. And so Bright Track Consulting, my long-term vision where I'm aiming everything I do is aiming towards a future in which Canadian business families are looked to as the example of communication excellence, which sounds ridiculous because ultimately I would say we're kind of the butt of the joke. Family communication, yeah, right. I know these people. They are smart, they are caring, they are intelligent, and they are quick to adopt good things. And so I have faith that this is possible. And so every initiative, every action I'm taking is leading in that direction. And the book is really kind of the first biggest piece of that puzzle that I believe is missing and could really help.
I love that. And I love that you knew within yourself that you could be doing more and you could be helping more people. And being called to do that tells me who you are as a person. But I want to dive into kind of the logistics of succession and succession planning. And I know at Bright Track, you are helping more than just farm families. You are helping, like you said, Canadian business owners be effective communicators. And what better family business or businesses in general than to help than farmers? So I want to talk about succession planning within farm families. And I know there are a lot of folks listening who maybe are hesitant to have these conversations, not only around their kitchen table, but they're hesitant to even have them with their partners. Talk to me about starting these conversations. How do people start the conversation about succession planning?
So, the answers varied greatly. But one of the patterns that I've witnessed and that I would draw attention to is I feel like there's been a lot of advice around this and succession and investment and resources for decades. And yet the statistics aren't getting better. So something's wrong. And one of the things that I feel is amiss is that in advising and in the recommendations for farm families, you have to have this conversation and talk to them about this or talk to them about this. And what it does is that it assumes that the people have the actual language of how to do that. So my question is not about their intelligence. These are smart people. They've just never done this before. And so one piece of the puzzle, and that's what I certainly attempt to do in presentations, in workshops, in the resources I'm building, is around how might you say that? How would you phrase that? And literally some scripts that people can build upon around, okay, well, if you had to have a question about wills and estates, or about if you're concerned about someone's mental health, or if you had to introduce the possibility of a prenuptial agreement. These are all things that people, they hear them and they can literally feel it physically, like it tightens their chest. Understandably, these are sensitive and there's risk involved in the conversation, but that's not a good enough reason to not have it. But it's also okay to say, I don't know how to have this conversation. So we can, as advisors, we can kind of wag our finger and say, do better. But I actually believe that we are failing to equip. And that's one of the gaps and why conversations don't start in the first place. It's also where having a third-party facilitator to be a catalyst, to create a safe space to start the conversation can really take time off the process. For some families, that's a really important ingredient.
I think the language piece is so important. And I think the language which we use can really make or break that conversation. To like get right out of the gate and say something that is going to offend your father-in-law, or, make the millennial farmer have hurt feelings about the work or whatever they've provided. You had mentioned a lot of times when we're having these conversations, and I'm guessing it's the lack of language of knowing what to say or how to say it, the hurt feelings that come along with it. And recovering from those conversations, I think, takes more time than learning the correct language to start these conversations.
Completely. One thing that I personally practice, and I will recommend it consistently, is if you have any hesitation about having a conversation, and I will call it important. Some people call it difficult. Some people call it hard. I'm saying it's an important conversation. Take the time and make yourself a script. In a safe place, write out what it is you're trying to say and work it through until you can find those perfect words. And sometimes you can bring it to like another friend, like a trusted friend, and say, hey, can you have a look at this? How does this sound? Can you poke holes in this idea? Because even for myself, if I know that it's an important conversation and I'm anxious about saying it incorrectly, for goodness sake, I'm a professional speaker. I will write myself a script and I will hold it up and I'll say, Caitlin, I have something important to say and I'm really concerned about saying it incorrectly. So I'm actually going to read it to you so I can be kind and gentle. And I will read it out because our brains are not our friend when we are in that state. There's sticks that are going to get thrown in the spokes unintentionally. And this is too precious to not care for it properly.
Absolutely. And, we had mentioned it's smart people having these conversations. And there is absolutely no shame in writing out what you're going to say, figuring out what it is that's important to you so you don't miss it, because it is anxiety inducing. And when you're in fight or flight mode, your brain is not working up top in tip-top shape. So of course, there's the opportunity to say something wrong or to miss a point that you wanted to make. Talk to me about, once we have the language or once we feel confident in the messaging moving forward that we want to have these succession conversations, what are some of just the basic preliminary steps that farm families should be looking at when it comes to planning for succession? And we can do this for each generation. What are the plans for the current older generation? And what are the plans for the upcoming generation?
It's a big question. And I will say that I don't think there's one way. And I repeat that often. People are looking for the way. How are we going to do this? And like, there is no one way, but there is one way that will be most perfect for you, or the best option available. But something that I have witnessed is that specifically in our industry, in our culture of agriculture, it is not perceived as a safe place to express your needs. It's perceived as selfish. It's perceived as greedy. And you don't want to come across like that. But ultimately, succession is a needs analysis. What do you need? What do you need? What do you need? Can the farm business handle it? And so if every person can take responsibility for what I need is certainty for the future, here's my cost of living. So here's some income needs and specifications. And I've done some of the math and I have a good set of that. I'm hoping that I'll own a home at some point, or some land, some livestock, whatever that might look like. So fill in those blanks and really paint the clearest picture you possibly can of what the desired outcome will look like and what role clarity you might need. And this goes for every generation, right? So it's not necessarily about the senior generation exiting, but how will their role change? What involvement would they love to continue to have if that's their choice or if that's their preference? If you can express what your needs are and bring that to the table, that's what allows you to say, oh, okay, like let's look at the math of the possibilities of this entity, of this enterprise. Can it meet these needs? Sometimes it can't. And so you need to kind of rejig and address it. But the ability for each person to take responsibility for clearly stating what their hopes and dreams are, specifically in their needs for the future, is deeply powerful and will lay out a path like nothing else will.
And even me hearing that, and it's so black and white. And when you're thinking about it and when you are imagining this conversation, 9 times out of 10, it's probably not black and white in your head. There's those emotions mixed into it, right? But at the end of the day, it's black and white. It's numbers on a piece of paper. It's saying that this is my cost of living. This is what I need out of an operation to continue my lifestyle after retirement on a farm, right?
Yep.
It doesn't seem so hard, but when there's those emotions in there, that's when the big feelings and potentially the hurt feelings can come out of it.
Right. And just the guilt of expressing your personal wants. There's something there that is people tend to withhold. And in fact, they deny it all the time. They don't even think it, never mind speak it. It's not every family, but it is a common enough bond that I feel it's worth talking about. Once people have that sense, and I hesitate to say black and white because everything's gray, but to the best of our ability here and based on what we know right now, not being able to read the future, say, this is what I hope for. Can you state that? Can you clearly paint that picture so other people can adopt and think about what it is that's important to you? It's a robust conversation and it can be hard to get there, but my gosh, it's so freeing once it's clear because then you can all pull in the same direction.
Talk to us about the benefits of having a neutral third party in those conversations.
I really appreciate a quote from Elizabeth Gilbert, who is the author of Eat, Pray, Love. And the quote is, our family knows how to push our buttons because they installed them. And that's why we can't not trip on some of our family habits, history, baggage, preferences, assumptions, stories. And even when we're working really, really hard to be disciplined, to be performing or speaking in a business-like way, we're going to get triggered. There's those little things. And so having a third party can kind of set a tone of expectation amongst everybody, and everybody's behavior tends to tighten up a little bit and in a more respectful way. I would say a good facilitator will also have some specific rules of engagement in terms of this is undivided focus. We're turning off the phones. We're turning off our watches. There's no laptops. There's no iPads. We need to give undivided focus for this to be really effective. They will make sure everybody has a voice at the table, so it creates balance where there might be imbalance otherwise, the talkers and the not talkers, that type of thing. Another beautiful thing is that they don't know what they don't know, so they can ask questions that are very difficult for in-family members to ask. So I'll give an example. Like in a family, they'll say, well, you know what I mean? And as a facilitator, I'll say, I actually don't know what you mean. Say more. So the kind of shortcuts that happen in conversation, that's actually the nuggets. That's where you peel back some layers and go, wait a minute. This actually isn't clear or consistent or known across the board. We don't have a level understanding here. And so that can be really powerful and fun. Like the moments in those rooms when people are like, really? Like things that they learn about their family members in those moments. It's pretty powerful.
Well, and like you had said, like expressing your wants and needs is not something I feel like a lot of us do on a day-to-day basis anyways. And like you said, when you're with your farming family and you're with them every day and you're working every day and you think you're working towards the same goal, but sometimes I'm sure it comes out in those conversations that you're not even speaking the same language. And just to have that clarification around what your wants, needs, and expectations are, what a gift to have.
Yeah. And it can be a catalyst. It can be something that everything else can be built upon. It's my goal actually when I'm in those conversations is that this will be a touchstone conversation that people will think back to as like that moment. Not to be so grandiose, but rather, okay, this is when we kind of circled the wagons and really began from a place of understanding.
I have a question for you, and this is a really broad question because you've worked with hundreds and hundreds of farm families and families across Canada. As a farmer myself, and as a person who gets to connect with a lot of amazing farmers through the podcast or through conferences, I think it's often that we hear the horror stories when it comes to succession planning and the lack of planning and all of the things. But I want to flip that around because we've all heard enough horror stories. Talk to me about some of the biggest wins that you have seen with your clients throughout the years.
I love your comments about horror stories. For whatever reason, I'm just going to make a quick comment on this. I actually have it's kind of a bone to pick. From an advisory perspective, in an effort to monetize services and sell them, it uses fear as a motivator. Fear is a crappy motivator. It doesn't work. It actually results in paralysis. And this work, no matter how fluffy it might sound, you have to begin with hope. It is a critical success factor in my mind. And so I will start with families. Again, nobody cares about this like you do. You are intelligent. You have figured things out before. You have to do this. How might I support you? And not have to as in only you can do this. This is yours. Having that vote of confidence is something that I think we can all do. And encourage each other in the industry and say, you can do this. You've done freaking hard things before. Like, give me the list. Let's go. So there's that. The stories. Oh gosh. Patti, we incorporated. Like, oh my gosh, really? Like, holy cow. This actually happened. So that's like just one little example. Or the dad that came up to me months later and he's like, Patti, like that conversation changed the way we're treating each other. Or we're talking to each other differently now. And not to say that it's me that's doing it, but they recognize that it was a shift of the way they were looking at things and that they grew in awareness of what was theirs and that it was their responsibility to take action. I've also had families where they said, you know what, we actually realize now that we need to stop trying. Like it's time for us to part ways. That's not a fail. Like if that provides relief and permission to stop trying something that's really not working, like that's okay too. Even awareness of their position, because some businesses are in a tough spot. And for them to have a safe place to say, yeah, this isn't working, I would call that a win as well. Largely though, I feel like a lot of the clients I've worked with in recent years, it almost like I send them off like ships into the night. And I'm really hopeful for them. But I continue to have little bits of feedback and threads that tell me that they're figuring it out. And I know they can.
And I think that piece for you has to make, those are the feel-good moments when you've given them just a way, a path, a light to the path of which way to go. And like you've said, you know, we're smart people. We understand business. We understand finances. We understand these things. It's just the family piece that sometimes can make it a little bit more complicated. But I honestly think sharing the success stories is more important than sharing, like we said, the stories that we've all heard time and time again, because it is paralyzing. It is a way to make us stop in our tracks and overanalyze absolutely everything instead of just having the conversation that's black, white, and a little gray in between.
I would say my challenge to advisors in the industry, and I think a lot about this, the long-term messaging has been, this is really difficult. You could lose your farm, you could lose your family, you could pay a lot of taxes. You can't do this without us. And I personally believe that we can shift that message and say, this is important. It'll be some of the most meaningful things you ever do. You can do this. How can I support you?
Absolutely. And you are supporting us because you wrote a book for all of us to read. So let's dive into the newest venture of Patti. You are a published author. Congratulations.
Thank you. It is crazy and amazing. And it's my response. I think it's like someone should do something. And so I did it.
I know that feeling all too well of somebody should really be doing this. And it's just like, well, I guess that somebody's looking back at you in a mirror. So
right.
Tell us about your new book.
So The Future Leader, The Successor's Guide to Family Business Leadership, was born out of some of the comments I made earlier of what are the patterns that seem to be recurring and seem to be continuing to hold back transition, succession discussions. And what I was witnessing is that, my goodness, first of all, if you wanted to learn about succession, you could read for the rest of your life. Like online resources, there was no shortage. So that is not the limiting factor. But they tend to be geared to the senior generation. And that actually makes sense because really all you have to do is follow the money. Who has their name on title? Who has check writing authority? And who has a decision-making authority? And so it would be natural that advisors would typically be drawn to that generation. And so that's where a lot of the messaging has been. But the flaw I have witnessed, and I'd like to answer, is the second generation or the upcoming generation, the successor, is said, wait, work hard, and trust me. And that is not even close to enough to give them the right tools to develop themselves. These are smart, young, caring, ambitious people that are scrambling to figure out what it is they're supposed to be doing. And they tend to be pointed in the direction of operational tasks, day-to-day things. And there's just a lot more to leadership development that they can take on and lead themselves. And so, hence the book. It's everything I wish successors knew, but consistently seem to be missing.
Right. Well, then you've done it. You've put it in the one book to make it a lot easier for them. What has been some of the reaction so far? The book has just recently come out, but what has been some of the reaction from your readers so far?
I mean, first of all, sharing it in the first place and putting it out to the world is like walking around naked. It's really vulnerable, but the feedback has been solid. In particular, I did a couple things. So it's a business fable style. So what it is I wrote all of the content, the things that I wish people knew, the concepts and explaining them and putting them in a accessible way. But I put the business fable around it. So I wrote a story of Jordan and Kelly. Jordan is the successor. Kelly is a family friend who was a successor that agrees to mentor Jordan. And so it's just a conversation between them over a period of years. And it is a nod to so many common patterns that prove unhelpful or those that do prove helpful. And just highlighting some things that are assumptions that are typically incorrect, some tips and tricks, some of the language, concepts around self-awareness. I would say the book covers topics that are a mile wide and an inch deep. And so the feedback is, oh, like this reminded me of stuff I kind of already knew, but I just never thought about it this way. Or I couldn't put it down was another piece of feedback. Or everybody in my family needs to read this, whether they're planning to farm or not. It's accessible. It's not super long. It's digestible. And I call it a care package for successors.
I'm curious of your perspective on this and when it comes to leadership in successors. I was recently at a conference and one of the speakers spoke about leadership and leadership on a farm. And I was the MC, so I got to ask questions afterwards. And one of my questions to the audience was, who in here sees themselves as a leader? And the room that I was speaking to are the successors of their farm. And very few raised their hand or stood up. And then I made them all stand up because I said, I see all of you as leaders, potential leaders of your farm and of your operation and of your business. And to me, the sign of leadership on the right path is taking the initiative to learn more, to be curious. What do you see as leadership for the next generation, for the successors?
I think you described it really well, that people perceive leadership as a title. So you're the owner or you're the decision maker. But really, leadership is a behavior that you can perform from wherever you are. And I like how Abby Wambach talks about it. She was the former captain of the U.S. women's soccer team. And she talks about leading from the bench. It's about accountability, to take risks. If you make mistakes, own the mistakes, clean up, move on. Cheering everybody on, being a consistent encourager, being curious, as you said. So the fact that people are waiting to lead, they believe that, again, they need to have their check writing authority and name on title for that to be true. It just isn't true. That's not the case. It's about the way you choose to live your life every day. And these successors have that opportunity. But you layer in what we were talking about earlier in family dynamics, parent-child relationships, and perception of other family stakeholders or business stakeholders. There's a lot of mixed messages and uncertainty, but it doesn't have to be that way. It can be made more clear. And so personal accountability and ownership of it, together with some communication and really thoughtful, curious questions, can really exemplify what leadership is.
Absolutely. For the successors that are listening right now, what do you want them to know about their future in their family business?
They can do this, I have no doubt, and literally only they can. So therefore, what responsibility are they taking for their own development? What are they doing to make progress? And even baby steps count. But ongoing training, networks, peer groups, leading conversations, and learning to navigate some of the important conversations you talked about earlier, it's how you choose to live every day. And start as early as possible. If you haven't started yet, today's a great option. I will say this book I specifically wrote for 15 to 25-year-olds, meaning it is accessible for them. But I think any successor will find value. There may be some things they might choose to skim over if it's, maybe old news, but in general, I feel like there's something that each successor could take home and put to work, because I've developed it with resources in it. Here's how you might ask this. Have you had this conversation? Do you know the answer to this question? So yeah, I think just to come back to the successors, I know you can do this. How might we support you?
Absolutely. And find the people that can support you in this. And that could be a professional. That could be your neighbor. That could be somebody on the internet who has gone through the same things you have, right? Like, we can all learn from each other.
Absolutely. I think that is a real risk. And I know that you think about it, and I've talked about this before in terms of the isolation of our industry. Often people don't see a better way other than what they know, and what they know is a sample set of one. And so we live in an incredibly connected time. Don't waste it. Reach out. And if you don't find the first great contact, go to the next one. And it's not necessarily about whether you're introverted or extroverted. It's more so about, I need more examples or more information than just the one I'm working on here. So seek that because it's available.
Yeah, absolutely. The being connected And having all of this information is such a gift for us. And we should really, really be using that to our advantage. Patti, what is your vision for the future of family business leadership in agriculture?
I have come to the conclusion, and I say it often enough. I said, I'm tired of watching people hurt each other. And because I know these to be smart, agile, adaptive people who care very much about making it work, I know this is possible. I know that there will be a time when we will look back and say, man, can you remember when it was so crazy how hard transition was? That's what I crave. That's what I see. And I see it happening in terms of the language that people are using. And I want to just keep fanning that flame and putting more fuel in that tank, more resources and examples and samples and ways that people can practice it. And then there will be very little that will hold us back, because we have just an incredible resource in terms of people and in terms of the farms and assets and the country that we live in. And so imagine if we weren't tripping over this narrative that has been repeating for quite a while. I'm sincerely optimistic. Yeah, I can't wait to witness what happens, because the potential is great.
Absolutely. Well, and you've seen what happens when good conversations happen and respectful conversations happen, and it moves forward, and people have the good stories to share, and people are craving those good stories, and we want to hear good stories when it comes to transition and family business, and especially in agriculture. So thank you for the work that you have done for the families that you've worked with. And thank you for sharing this wealth of knowledge with the folks listening today. And I'm so excited to see the bright future of Patti in Bright Track.
You know what? It takes a village. I have no desire to do this alone, but I sure want to be contributing to the common good. And my hope is that The Future Leader becomes a book that people recommend to their loved ones, to their friends, to their peers in the industry, and pass it on, because that's where the power will happen in terms of we can all be pulling in that direction. And I can't wait.
Yeah, that's amazing. For the folks listening who would like to connect with you or find a copy of the book, where can they find you and where can they find the book?
The best place is at the website www.thefutureleader.ca. So you can go and find the book. You can find it in print, ebook, and audiobook formats. I know there's a fair number of people in this target audience that are not readers, and I don't want that to hold you back. And there's also a Let's Talk section, so you can reach out to me and we can continue the conversation.
Perfect. I count audiobooks as reading on my Goodreads total for the year. Some people might not, but I certainly do.
It's a key part of training for me. Windshield time is the reality of living on the prairies, and it's very seldom that I won't be on the road or in some piece of machinery with an audiobook.
Yeah, absolutely. Patti, my last question for you is, what is the most rewarding part about helping farm families with transition?
When I can feel their shoulders lower or witness their shoulders lowering in the conversation, when they recognize that this is for them and there is hope. People lose a lot of sleep over this stuff, and it doesn't have to be that way. And so that's really rewarding.
The shoulders dropping is my favorite part of any conversation. When the defense is lower and we all realize that we are here for the common good.
We're on the same team.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Patti, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Rural Woman Podcast. The Rural Woman Podcast is more than just a podcast. We are a community. A huge thank you to the Rural Woman Podcast team, audio editor Max Hofer. A special thanks to our Patreon executive producers, Sarah Reedner from Happiness by the Acre, and Carrie Munven from Laystone Farms. To learn how you can become a Patreon executive producer or other ways to financially support the show, head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast to get the latest episodes directly on your playlist. And if you are loving the show, please be sure to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other platform that accepts ratings and reviews. You can connect with us on social media at The Rural Woman Podcast and with me at Wild Rose Farmer. One of the best ways you can support the show is by sharing it. Send this episode to a friend or share on your social media. Let's strengthen and amplify the voices of women in agriculture together. Until next time, my friend, keep sharing your story.